so great presentations. And as a Chief Innovation Officer, obviously I'm very interested in hearing what other ecosystems are doing, what can we learn in Aruba, what's going well, how can we collaborate, and I was very inspired by by your talks today. And I'm going to start with Paola. And I've been following Medellin for a long time. I think it's incredibly impressive how the city rebranded itself, how this movement started many years ago, and now you're one of the top innovation hubs in the world. And that's very, very inspiring for an island like Aruba and also other smaller islands or cities that are not your usual suspects to become innovation hubs. So you were I'm going to go right ahead I'm going to dive into it. So you were at Futura Cafe, and you spent some time with ATECH team since you were here. You met some of my team members of Futura. Hopefully you connected with some attendees of the conference. Are there any similarities that you've noticed between the Medellin ecosystem and the Aruba ecosystem that you believe are strengths that we're not tapping into or not can tap into more?
Well, I mean, I don't know Aruba enough, I think. I was at Futura Cafe, I was here yesterday in the workshop we did, in the co-creation workshop. There were banks, there were a lot of different kind of actors who participated, and we talked about food waste challenges, and I think also about the local production, local food production challenges here in Aruba. And it was really beautiful to see, even if in the beginning nobody expected to have to sit together and work on solutions together, how eager everyone was. And I think people here are really open, and in the workshop I really felt this, this eagerness to create solutions together. So for me, that's the base, and that's important.
So there's an energy there that we can definitely tap into more. That's great to hear, and it's good to hear it from people coming from the outside in. Because we've been working on this for a long time. Started 5 years ago, trying to move the country, and it's always nice to hear these kind of comments because it means that the efforts are paying off. I'm gonna skip to Andy first because you just spoke, and by the way, great slides, taking us back in time. I had a MySpace, the kind of ages. Yes, I've just told you my age there. But so Andy, I mean, we talk about this a lot. I've known you for a couple of years. And we talk a lot about cultivating leaders and especially our youth leaders and empowerment. Can you share a bit more about your thoughts on how can governments, for example, the Aruba governments or other smaller islands like Aruba, how can we be a more active partner in cultivating these innovation leaders that we need to carry us into the future? What can we do that we're not doing today? What can we do more of?
That's a good question. Raise your hand real quick if you're a young person below the age of 30 from Aruba. Awesome. And how many of you all are entrepreneurs or are thinking about kind of going into the entrepreneurship space? Good number. Terrific. I think, as an outsider here in Aruba for the first time, I think I've heard kind of the Aruba story from back in the States, and it's an incredible story. It's a story I think that the government can play up and build on, of at one point having an economy that was very focused on the oil sector, that then over time, by necessity and by purpose, transformed and became much heavier and more successful around tourism and other sustainable development and other means. More kind of, how do you diversify from that particular sector that was an engine of growth? And we see that with many of our American cities like Pittsburgh and Cleveland, and places where maybe coal or steel or industries that have kind of had fallen on hard times, and they have to change and iterate. And I think today when you look at the Aruba economy, I think there are some real opportunities to think about in addition to that tourism space for young people who want to go into STEM or who want to go into to start the next Facebook here on the island, or want to create the next driverless cars, or tap into the challenges around sustainable development that are you have to deal with on the shores day in and day out. I think there's some real opportunities to really invest in some of those spaces. I know you're already doing it, but I think kind of there's a great story to tell here, and that story I think is just starting in terms of where the diversification of the economy can go next, and entrepreneurship playing a key role to try to encourage young people to stay here, reinvest in Aruba, and to kind of have that as their innovation hub for the globe.
Thank you. I'm glad that you brought up diversification, because I definitely want to talk about that a little bit more, because at the end of the day, this is what we're working towards. How do we diversify our economy? How do we create a more resilient future? Not just for the current generations, but the ones that are coming, the next generation. So Adam, you have experience with economic development, and I would think at the center of any economic development plan, there is a diversification strategy, whether it be massive transformative shifts or going into niches or expanding existing niches. Can you share a bit on what you're working on in terms of diversification, what you've seen that works and what doesn't work when it comes to diversification strategies?
Absolutely. I think when it comes to diversification, I can share a little bit, and I'm struck by the similarities in terms of the stage of development of the economy that Aruba is at, and where Fredericton or New Brunswick is at, as well as some of the similarities around demographics and population that we spoke of earlier. About 15 years ago, New Brunswick, as a province, our major industries were primarily forestry and agriculture. And those are two industries that we all understand have been under global disruption and have declined in terms of what was the traditional business model. And it wasn't so long ago that we were at about a 15% unemployment in our region. What we did that was really a catalyst for diversification in our economy came down to innovation. So number one, I think that it is great that terminology seems to be commonplace no matter who you talk to on the island, and understanding that. I think number two, having that longer or medium term vision around being that innovation capital for the Caribbean and Latin America is really key. And then for us, it was looking inwards and saying, what assets are we not tapping into? In Fredericton, we had about 60 research and development institutes within a 2-kilometer radius that were primarily academic in their focus. There was not a lot of commercialization going on. So for us, what made a huge difference was having all of the players, whether it be civil society, entrepreneurs, larger corporations from the private sector, government, and those research institutes at the table, to be able to plot forward how can we commercialize this IP that is sort of sitting on the shelf right now, and who will play what role, and having a commitment with all the players at the table for collaboration, non-duplication, so we can make the most out of our resources. 10 years, 15 years after that, that IP has been leveraged. Now we are starting to talk about forest tech, ag tech. We're putting a layer of technology on old industries to chart our path for the future. And we're recognized as the startup capital of Canada in 2016 after, a really hard time just 10 or 15 years before that.
That's great. So you mentioned the different niches that are currently doing well and you're looking or going into. And this is a question for anyone of you, all of you on the panel. What are your thoughts on going all in on one niche? As you're working on developing, we're still an embryonic innovation ecosystem. I think there's ways to go. We've gone a long way the past couple of years. What are your thoughts on picking one thing and be the best in that one thing versus having a bigger basket of different industries to go into and develop? Thoughts on that?
My thought would be choosing one thing that you can tell everyone, both locally and globally, you are the best at, is really important as a branding initiative. However, it shouldn't be exclusive to other opportunities that exist on the ground. So I think having that centric viewpoint to what you do best and where you want to go with it is really important from a communications perspective, and really gets into talent retention and inspiring entrepreneurs, etc. But don't lose sight on the ground, behind the scenes, of the other opportunities that exist. We were talking yesterday about asset mapping and competitive advantage for Aruba. I think there's a ton of opportunities, but choose that one and then work behind the scenes on the others, would be my advice.
Yeah, I like to say, I totally agree with Adam, and think there's a benefit to kind of have a brand of kind of what is one big thing that you want all the companies in the world to think, we want to come to Aruba because they are the leaders in this particular sector. You see that in, I think, the earlier examples that we kind of referenced of Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Boston, Massachusetts, and parts of the States. Pittsburgh kind of had been the steel town that then government and private sector and other organizations got together and they reinvented it based on what was around them. Carnegie Mellon, a lot of science and technical universities that were top-notch, and ended up leading in the robotics space and driverless car space. They ended up bringing Uber, who has their hub still now, taking in scientists who graduated from the Carnegie Mellon robotics program in Pittsburgh with their driverless car program. Cleveland, you have the Cleveland Clinic, that's a famous medical center in Cleveland. So they've really create a brand around medical and tech in that intersection. Boston also medical devices because of all the action happening around the medical space. So I think to the asset mapping, thinking about what is here already, what are the educational institutions, what are the local organizations, what do young people want to actually have for careers, what are they excited about, and then kind of figuring out what are one or two of the big things, and then how do we also incorporate the other things that people want to go into, so we get more young people staying and feeling that this is a place that I can pursue my ambitions and my career, and I don't have to look for opportunities elsewhere.
And just to complement, I think also like Germany's strategy with the digital hubs, like they're focusing on digitalization because they know they have to start working on it. But under that umbrella, like it's huge, right? So they're like kind of like creating within a niche different kind of like knowledge center or excellence centers. So if you define a niche, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that you are just like narrow-minded, just focusing on that, but that you're kind of like we have to find a strategy to kind of like get the most out of it.
So what I've heard from all of you is pick something that we're good at, own it, really own it, share it with the world, but keeping our minds open and eyes wide open for other opportunities that can be extension of that niche or other sectors that are linked to that niche. Thank you all very, very much today. This is very inspiring, and hope to be able to collaborate with you and going forward in the future to keep growing Aruba's innovation ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you.